Hi and hello watch fans, and welcome to another edition of The Real Time Show with me, your friendly neighbourhood watchmaker Rob Nuts. Today I am joined stateside by my good friend Mike Pearson of Zodiac Watches. Mike, pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing, mate?
I'm really good. It's lovely to hear your voice. It's been too long, and yeah, congrats on this podcast. I'm really honoured to be on it. Thank you.
Well, it's our honour to have you here, and it's not the first time we've actually podcasted together, but I think this might be the first time a podcast we've recorded makes it out onto the airway.
Yeah, that one's in the archive somewhere.
You know, I always worry about that because I really can't remember what we said on it and why it was archived, but let's just leave that one out there in the ether and hope nobody ever stumbles across it.
Well, I actually did look for it after we met recently, and no, it's gone. It just got deleted because it was never used for the podcast. We did a series I did it with VJ from Morris, I did Red Bar Crew, yourself. But it was when I was within a retail store and it was an idea, but I left. And the podcast never went. That's probably why.
And you're not in a retail store now, so we're going to get to exactly where that stop on your long and winding journey was in your chronology. But let's go right back to the beginning. Who the hell are you? Where do you come from? Because our listeners will have noticed already that's not an American accent that we hear there.
Definitely not. I've lived in America since 2007, apart from for 1 year. But I am from the middle of England, born and raised in a small town that no one needs to know. Everyone goes through it on the train, but it's where I'm from and I love it. Yeah, very proud Englishman. I think for an early age, about 18, I did my schooling abroad. I think when I listen to your stories of where you go and how you look at the world and how you look at Europe, I feel quite similar in many ways because I'm very spiritually English, very proud of where I'm from. It's made me who I am, but I do think there's a wide world out there. But watches were not where I started, not the reason why I am where I am today. And it's definitely not from my background or where I'm from. None of my friends would probably understand some of the pricing of some of the conversations that you and I might have in our world. But again, where I'm from kind of keeps you grounded and you realise what a dollar means or a pound means.
Yeah, I mean, you're a Villa fan, aren't you?
Unfortunately, true love.
You know the meaning of the true despair. You know pain.
I know pain, I know hope, I know how to have it dashed, but I am that storyteller of what was and what could be. And that will never go.
Yeah. I definitely know the what was. I'm not sure about the what could be, but I hope springs eternal, and I live in hope for you and your team as well. A fine Midlands institution. But look, okay, so for anyone that doesn't know, we're talking about a football or a soccer team for our listeners over the Atlantic, which actually constitutes 82% of our audience, would you believe, Mike? So this is your wheelhouse.
Hello, America.
Hello, America. Hello. Good morning, America. So listen, you now work for Zodiac, but it isn't the first brand you've worked for. And I'd like to hear about all of the brands you've worked for in and around the watch industry and what happened to you while you were working for them. Go ahead.
Bit of a story. So when I was in my early 20s, I was going to be a teacher. My whole outlook was to look after young kids and primary school, preschool, all the age groups that were, getting the kids going. You might hear I talk a lot and I've got an enthusiasm for life. And when I was around younger kids, it was brilliant for me because I felt like I could offer something and thought that was the direction I should go in. But I, at 18, moved to Spain to do a course for that. And I passed it. It was fantastic. And it went into university. But what that year in Spain also did was kind of light a fire inside of me for travel that I didn't know existed. Whilst going to university, I was also working within the travel and tourism industry, hotel work and bar work, doing what you do when you're trying to get a few extra pounds in the pocket. And I had a bad car crash. I came through the window of the car. Someone hit me at 70 miles an hour. I was going at 2 miles an hour. Actually, the car passed through me. I had taken off my seatbelt, and as the car smashed in, I was lifted out the seat. The car went past me, and I landed. And if I'd had the seatbelt on, I wouldn't be talking today. And so that crash, that nasty moment, which I was very lucky. I thought I'd lost my arm, but I was numb. But it was just it was behind my head, and I broke a collarbone. I broke some ribs. I had some tissue damage, and I almost lost my ear, and I bit through my tongue pretty badly. So the sales pitch would have been different if that had fell off. But the car crash pushed me to want to have one more try at life. And so I went to work on a cruise ship. I was very, very young. I thought I'll go and get more schooling, more education, and I will look after children on there. They have kids clubs. I thought it'd be a great way to get me back into the mindset. I interviewed with a company that looks after celebrity cruises in the Royal Caribbean, and they said, no, you talk too much. You should look after the adults. You should do entertainment. Give it 6 months, see what you think. And I did it. And I was promoted throughout those times up to a cruise director, which was great. But at that time as well, I also met somebody that I fell in love with. And to stay with her, I couldn't quite do what I was doing. She was doing another job, and ships move around. And again, I was still very, very young. So you're still trying to figure out what your path was. And on board these cruise ships, there was a company owned by LVMH called Onboard Media, and they promoted watches and jewelry ashore. So these people have their own TV channel. They have a desk. They have live presentations for jewelry, for watches. And they would tell people what to buy and where to buy it. And there was all kinds of awful things you could buy and things I didn't quite like, but I did love watches. And for some reason, it became a massive part of my day, my psyche, buying into them. Bought my first proper watch doing that job. And to stay with the girl again, we decided to leave ships and join one of the brands that I was promoting and fell in love with, because she was from Michigan. And that's where 10 years of my life was spent in America. And that was 2006. The company that I started with was called Ernst-Benz, and with Leonid Hankin and his father, they had a really famous watch repair shop in Birmingham, Michigan. And a few years before me meeting Lenny, he bought a brand from Ernst-Benz himself. Big 47mm watch, chronograph. He invented or designed a moon phase with him, with Mr. Benz, and it just kind of became a thing. And so literally when I moved to America, this was my job. We didn't quite know where to go, what to go, but I knew the Caribbean and we had all kinds of gusto. And then the crash of the world happened, the economic crash of 08. And at the same time, the reason why I moved to America, the relationship broke down as well. So you think of, do I go home and start again? Do I go back to ships? Is that a backward step? Or do I push on with this little bit of momentum that we're starting to gain? So I said to Lenny, give me a credit card, bag of watches, let's go see what we can do. And very raw, not knowing quite what I was getting into, we started to learn how to grow a small brand that had no right and reason to be growing through an economic recession. And we did it. We opened up in the Caribbean, and we had some of the greatest days still to this day with that brand, learning how to sell, what they want. I mean, I love, one day, me and him, we were tag teaming over 2 separate locations for one store in Grand Cayman, and we sold like 26 watches. I've never seen anything or felt anything like that buzz, but I don't know if I've ever done that again or been a part of that again. But we also opened up a lot of stores and met a lot of people, some of the industry veterans, some of the bad habits, the good habits, the people that will guide you, the ones you should stay away from. You learn everything at that age. And I was, incredibly young. I wouldn't say I was naive. I had my eyes wide open, but my glass half full attitude pushed me through when maybe others didn't. So I will be always forever grateful for Lenny. And we were doing things like Basel, we were doing Couture, JCK. And then one Basel, I met coming out of the elevator in the Swiss Hotel. If you know the hotel, it's just where everyone used to hang out when Basel was in its full pomp. And out came the elevator, Nick and Giles of Bremont. I just read their story in Watch Time magazine, and I was like, bloody brilliant.
I don't mean to interrupt, Mike, because the Bremont chapter is obviously one that many people will know from your story or know exists. I'm sure that they're fascinated to hear exactly what went on there and how the relationship with Nick and Giles grew. But because you are an absolute on-the-ground expert of how to grow a small brand with retailers, and that's something that we haven't really had on the show before, to be honest. Like, not really had that guy that's been right at the ground level, having to do everything and wear many hats, and just like you say, take a bag of watches and a credit card and a can-do attitude and just go out there into the world and make it happen. So is there anything you can share, like really technical stuff as well? I mean, like about the deals that you strike with retailers, like what kind of flexibility you have in terms of contracts you can make, what you can do to make these things more attractive to a retailer that maybe wasn't looking to take on a new brand, but you think is a key flag in the map for you. Can you just give us an idea of what it's like when you walk into a retailer that you desperately want that may not desperately want you?
I would probably slip that type of skill set that came with my time at Bremont. With Ernst-Benz, when we opened up, say, Diamonds International, it was one of the biggest days we could have ever had. We opened up 26 islands in one swoop, but the deals were hard. They're negotiating not only with the watch manager, the people that had the influence between a very big group. You have to then meet owners who have certain experiences with budgets and margins and making sure that we can market it. So those early days, what was really nice, because Leonid, he's been around watches his entire life, that we kind of went in together on those types of big meetings. And if you've ever met him or talked to him, he's a captivating character, tons of information of all brands. But it was also, I think, I found my voice next to him, where I would be the yin to his yang. And then later on, it was very much taking a story like Ramon, which we'll talk about in a moment, making it my own, and then finding my way to speak to an American audience, which is a very different way of opening with a Caribbean account or to a UK account. Because these American stores, especially with what I needed for Ernst Benz, what we definitely needed for Bremont, it was, you could go to for example, now Watches Switzerland, back then it was Tourneau, but you could go to a Jared or a Reeds or all these very, very large companies who've got a lot of stores. But then you were intertwining a lot of different complex conversations. For my focus in those early days, it was those individuals, those independents that would buy into you. And, we've got all of the complicated business talk that we can go into, but the thing that really got me is understanding, maybe that was different to a lot of other reps at the time or other people that were out there, was that people want to trust people, and it goes very, very granular. That if you are trusted and you can give somebody an idea of why you work for the brand and what you can offer, be it with events, with communication. My now wife, when we first met, I was like, I am going to get calls at 10, 11 o'clock at night because the West Coast is still open, or, at the time we had ships up in Alaska selling watches up there, and I will always answer the phone. And she says, well, why, when it's past hours? And it was, if I don't answer that phone, that one person who could be just a sales staff, it could be a manager, it could be the owner. But if I don't answer and they don't get the answer they want, that sale is lost. They will move to the next showcase and they might not come back to mine for the next 3 weeks. That was the mindset I've had since minute one, that if you are going to offer your name and your brand to somebody, you do not let them down. It's really important for me that comes through, even, which we'll go into with Zodiac, is I'm part of a very large corporation with the Fossil Ownership Group. But I want Zodiac to be treated differently, because I think a Zodiac customer might expect or deserve a different level of communication or service. And not to disrespect a $200 Fossil, but if you are going to have a battery change or it just stops working, more often than not, it can be replaced and it's just a bit of fun. Whereas for a $1,000 to $2,000 watch, going into all the watches that we've sold or worked with or seen, it's a lot of money that's relative, but also the complex nature of a watch buyer means that those store managers, store owners, sales associates need your support. And so when you're going in there for those first meetings, it's very much like a boxing match. You are finding out who's who, can I trust you, where would you fit within my plans? And that's both sides. On a brand, you got to make sure that the website looks good, the adjacency of where you'd sit within a store. And at the same time, they're thinking the same thing. Can I fit you on a website without upsetting the other brands? And if I put you in this showcase, will that brand over there get upset? So that the games are endless and the conversations can go on forever. But I will say that those early times, I figured out my narrative, my pitch, and that was always about, I'm here, I won't let you down.
Wow. I mean, that's good advice in a nutshell. Absolutely. Thank you for expressing that to our listeners so clearly, because I think it's really interesting to hear the experiences, the personal experiences that you have when you're out there fighting tooth and nail. It's not just as simple as walking into a store and being like, oh, hey, here are your new watches, please sell them. And then they sell. So much work, so much dedication, so much time. And that's something that a craft, shall we say, that you learned in those early days, but really refined while you were with Bremont. So go ahead and feed us with chapter 2 and I'll shut up again.
Thanks. I think when I first met Nick and Giles, and that first meeting was massive for me, because when you've given a brand like Ernst Benz 4 years of my life, then very young, I also knew that I was integrated within Leonid's family and his dad and his mom and his brother and all the people that worked there, because, what I did with Lenny was unique. So when I first met Nick and Giles, I had no intention of asking for a job or going for a job. It was just the fact that they were British, I was British, I had a Swiss brand, then American ownership, and they had this British brand that they couldn't get into America. Maybe we could help each other. Genuinely, I just wanted to say, hi, I'm Mike, love what you're doing, your story is inspirational, it'd be great to keep talking. And it ended up being more than that. You know Nick really well, and you met Giles as well, but Nick, for me, especially that first couple of meetings, was an energy and a star quality that I hadn't felt in a person for the longest time. I'm very lucky that I met Gerard Genta, I met Jean-Claude Biver, and they are incredible individuals, especially the Genta thing. That's like my star moment in watches, which I can talk to you about if you want. But when I met Nick, you saw a young guy who had, obviously a different level of breeding. I say that with respect, from where I'm from to where he's from. He flies planes. He was an engineer. He was very switched on, very captivating. But the watches, being British, I thought I could learn something. And so we ended up chatting a few times over early days of Facebook, very professional, Facebook Messenger. But I said, I'm coming home for Christmas. Let's have a pint. he was late. He's always late, but the drink lasted more than one, and we ended up spending hours and hours just talking about our thoughts on watches and what he wanted to bring to the industry. I was like, I want to do this with you. And he goes, well, what would you do? Because in all honesty and transparency, after a few years with Ernst Benz, I started to look back to home. You always look back to home. And I had chats with Raymond Weil. I had a few different conversations with some of the top managements who were in and around the UK scene, which I'd never been a part of. But I said, well, why don't we give each other 6 months and see what we can do? And is again, send us some watches, send us some training information. I will take that knowledge and I'll see what I've got. And it ended up being unbelievable. I was dating a girl in Arizona, so I started there, but I was still living in Michigan. So I had this really easy way of going in between the East Coast and the middle of the country. And I just used to just find my way through, guts and gusto of like, hi, I am Mike. This is what I'm doing now. Would you want to hear the story? And so to carry on with my ethos of communication, I then started to adding a new set of rules of, I will not come into your store. I will not cold call you unless you want me. So I would email with education to a lot of stores saying, if you ever want me to stop emailing, just let me know. So this is what's going on with Bremont now. This is where I'm at. These are the watches. Would you like to hear more? But as soon as someone says, let's chat or come to the store, I felt like it was like your family inviting me into their home and where's the slippers? I like the comfy chair. Let's get comfortable. And I think that's a really great place that kind of took me, within my morals of don't invite me in unless you want me. And then if you do, just know that I'm going to stick around for a bit because I think you're going to like what I've got to say. And that became a level of confidence within this brand. I was the voice of Nick and Giles and not the voice of Bremont in a very potentially important market for the brand. And those first couple of years, we opened up with, I think, 30 something retailers. And it was just the journey and the pleasure of my life because even though with Ernst Benz, you'd gone to these stores and you'd worked with different stores like John Varvatos or Barney's of New York at the time, but the Caribbean was where the money came in. I was going to E.D. Marshall and Topper Jewelers and Oliver Smith and in Arizona, and all these individuals were grand. And then you'd find these nuggets of which some people might disregard, like Dan and Anna, who have ended up being Timeless Luxury Watches, had a watch called Timeless Watch Exchange, and they were selling pre-owned watches. It's like, well, you should change your name because no one's going to want to work with a secondhand store for new watches. And, you started to become part of people's conversation. And to be a British guy, to grow a British brand, it just felt like the right fit at the time. And then every now and then I would wheel out an English brother to come over to the US. But in all honesty, I didn't want them there all the time. And that could have been because I had my flow. But I also wanted to keep my powder dry once again and bring them out when it was something really special, be it an event or a launch. So you find that you take ownership of every aspect of a brand where you didn't have any right to have it, but it didn't have anything in place. So you've got to. So you learnt marketing or you learn how to, social media was becoming big. You then discovered the community and then you become a face within a brand new 4 Red Bar crews and different collector communities. And every single day of my life, at that point, I woke up and thought, Bremont, and how can I get it to the next stage? It was brilliant.
I have to remember to turn the mute of my microphone off because I'm just sitting here like wowed by this cavalcade of information. So I know that while I was at Bremont, when was that? 2015. They released the Wright Flyer. Now, was that before or after your time, or were you involved in that? Because that's a very American-centric story of flight.
I was with Bremont for 8 years in a row, and I was there just after P51. No, just after EP120, just as we launched the P51, which had 2 of those watches had parts of a Spitfire and a Mustang in them, and they still to this day are the coolest watch they could have built. And every year they did a limited edition with history in it, and it was Victory, Codebreaker, D888, and then the Wright Flyer. So it was very, very far into my journey with Bremont, and I think that's also one of the turning points within my time of Bremont. I'm sure you or your listeners might know there was a certain bit of controversy just of how it was promoted and the PR behind it. And it was a case of, right, people didn't quite understand what Nick and Giles wanted to say. They said a word that was wrong, and they knew that, and they took ownership of it. But I also then, because of what I just told you with trust and my word is my bond and we won't let you down, also, I literally didn't go, and I don't think many people know this, I don't think Nick knows this, I didn't go home for 6 weeks. I literally got back from London where the event happened. I took Nick to Hodinkee. He did a video, say what the the whole idea of what the PR should have been and how it meant to come across. And it was really special of him to do that with me sitting there, across from Ben Clymer in their small offices. What they are today to what then was crazy. But that moment, I was like, right, Nick, off you go. I'm going to hit the road now. And I literally didn't go home for 6 weeks. I bought underwear and socks on the go, shirts when needed. It was just crazy because I wanted every single person who had said, I get it, I want it. I wanted to feel like it was going to still matter, because Americans especially are very trustworthy. They will open their door to the entirety of your world, invite you in, like I said. But if you let them down, it's really hard to win trust back. And I think that's a lovely place to be, because you know where you stand. But I felt like I owed it to them to show them what we wanted to do, because the watches were brilliant and the movement was fantastic. It was just PR nightmare in some ways. But I also realized that the more and more I was on that road and on that path, I couldn't grow myself in a career. I couldn't, no matter how people might have perceived me as, oh, you are the third brother, you are Brahman, I think of Brahman, I think of Mike, and that was great. But I also knew that by giving myself all of those years just by myself, the brand needed to grow, the team needed to grow, and I also needed to step back from being that. Otherwise, it would just be every success, every misunderstanding, maybe things that need to go wrong. You then have to find room for something else. And I had just started dating my now wife, and it's amazing how much you do not have room for life if you only do one thing. When you say that you move on to certain jobs and you want to know what happened here and there and everywhere. In all honesty, when I decided to leave Brahman a few years after Wright Flyer, I've never cried like that. When I made that decision, I went to the final Christmas party. I've never felt that sad to say goodbye to something that was me, part of me. But then I got back to the hotel room and my wife was there and she had a baby in her tummy and I loved her more. But it's amazing how hard it is to find yourself again once you let go of something that is just you.
But I mean, you spent a huge amount of time, especially by modern standards, in that one role, and all those years on the road. You were on the road traveling mostly alone for over a decade in total, I guess, if you include Ernst Benz in there. So you felt at that point in your life that a bit of stability and a bit of time with your feet on the ground was the right thing for you. So what did you do next? Where was your next move?
Well, I was asked by Dan and Anna from Timeless Luxury Watches if I wanted to move to Texas to be their store director. They were looking to build a new location and we could help. And I'd been part of their journey their entire time, and they'd been a massive part of my success with Brahman. And so I talked to my wife. We'd just gone through a really nasty snowstorm in Michigan. She'd got snowed in. I couldn't get back from one trip, and it just felt like, let's go somewhere a bit warmer. And the opportunity was great in Texas. I mean, politics aside, it can be a bit of a weird place for some people, but in terms of infrastructure and what you want, it's got it all here. And it's relatively safe in terms of what you can get with weather. And that was stupid because I had been offered jobs going down to Florida all my career, but I just wouldn't go because of hurricanes, and I wouldn't go to the West Coast because it was too far from America, from the UK. But that retail thing sounded great. So we did it and I joined, and it was different because my job was always on the go. And I'd go into the store and we'd set up things and we'd do what needed to be done. And what I also love is that Dan and Anna were building their legacy, and they were also building this store as well. And, they wanted input. And I started to look at things within Texas and the community and the Chamber of Commerce. And we did a blood drive. We did all sorts of events with brands, yourself included with Nomos. And I wanted to make Timeless a hub for a community. And that was exactly Dan and Anna's idea as well. But maybe, I had the ability that was a bit different because of my communication skills. That I could maybe offer a different voice than what Dan and Anna had. But what was great between us all and their manager at the time, Steve, was we all had that same goal of making sure that every brand could trust coming into that store. And I was on the other side of it. But I was lured back into watches. I was approached by Tudor to come and join them, which was the honor of my life. But I think what was very apparent was that when they wanted me, which was great, they wanted a certain way of someone selling. And I don't do the normal things. I also am because of, and this is probably a bad thing with Brahman, is that because you'd done so much in certain roles, you knew probably too many people, and certain conversations were maybe too involved than what somebody who was just there to sell was. And in the end, it wasn't right. It was not a role that was for me. I wasn't a personality for them. And for the first time in my life, you get a smack around the back of the head and you realize that you are not as good as you think you are. But also years later, you then realize, actually, that's just not a fit. And so you have to swallow a massive amount of humble pie and go, right, the biggest thing that was out there is not for me. My skill set is not there. And so what was quite cool at the time was that Brahmano asked me to come back. And as much as I love the brand and as much as I love, certain aspects of my life, like Aston Villa or, sports or certain types of food, never, ever, advice, ladies and gentlemen, never go back. And so when I went back to Brahman, I went in a different role. The brand had moved forward or different than what I would have done. And it was brilliant. But my role was not to sell anymore. It was to help with marketing and PR. And what had happened as we started to set things up, COVID happened. And the UK was looked after very differently than the American side of things, and they just couldn't look after me. So that had to go. So within a couple of years, I'd been smacked around the head twice and had to pick myself up. And I was like, well, what do I do? I turned down in the past brands as big as some of the major Swatch Groups brands. I turned down some really wonderful opportunities down in Florida, like I'd mentioned. And because of my love for Brahmano, my way of working, and the one time I tried something that was different, it wasn't right. So I thought, sod it. I'm done with watches. I'm going to move away during COVID and find my own way. And I had a year within tech as an account manager, just to do it, just to get away and be present during COVID and not sit there doing the same thing that I would have done if I was with any brand. And that would be talking to stores on social media or doing Zoom calls, which I did do on the end anyway, just to keep talking about watches. But within that year and a half within tech, I found my voice. I became a really good dad and husband again, and actually had the best time of my life. I mean, I know COVID was really difficult for lots of people, but for me, in Texas, in the sun, in our back garden with our little dogs and our kids, we ended up finding ourselves. And so it was really, really hard and sad, but also quite invigorating to kind of, get your superpowers back in a weird way. And I'd really, really enjoyed the fact that something bad, you find good within it.
I guess you found exactly what you always had. You just learned to see it in a different way because things had worked quite well, I would say, in the early part of your career, almost without you realizing that they couldn't work in quite the same way if you were put into a different environment or asked to work for a different brand or in a different style. But I mean, you had your success in the early days of Ern Spence, and then obviously Bremont, as you say, you were known in America as the face of the brand. Really, every retailer that I would visit for Nomos, and there were quite a few that crossed over, of course, they would be like, oh, do you know Mike? Mike's the guy from Bremont, and I was like, no one ever mentioned Nick or Giles. I mean, I never mentioned it to them, but like it was obvious like who the man to contact was there. And then you go to Timeless with Dan and Anna, who are lovely people, and it's in a lovely place in a lovely store, but having your feet glued to the ground didn't seem to suit you at the time, and the itch was there. And then Tudor comes, and who says no to Tudor? That's like the opportunity of a lifetime. But then within that, you realize, like, you know what you're good at is maybe the bits of the job that you just can't teach. And when you get up to those top levels with the big brands, and I say top levels in theory, it's what everyone aspires to, of course, they're wrapped in red tape. All of the talent, all of the fizz and the Billy Whizz, as people refer to you as, is gone. And it's all about formula, it's all about ticking the boxes, it's all about doing things in one way and one way only so that it can be tracked. Whereas you are almost artistic in the way that you approach it. You have a feel for people, you create those connections, those real connections that last. And so getting back into the industry in a role in which you're able to harness those talents, they're not so much, I would say, yeah, they're abilities. They're not skills. They're not learned and refined. They are something innate in you that, like, yes, you have refined them to a point at which they are devastatingly effective, but other people could never get to that level. Loads of people can walk into a massive brand, a group-owned brand, and they can be educated and they can be taught how to do things the right way, how to do things in the correct process, but they can't self-start in the way that you were always able to. So now you found yourself in Zodiac, which to me seems like an excellent fit because the brand is probably the right level of awareness for you to really get your hands dirty and get in there and grow it the way you like to grow it. But tell me, what's it like? How did you actually end up with that brand? And what is your experience of working for it like so far?
I had this conversation yesterday with the team at Watch Pro. They said, what is it like being a Fossil? And the guy told me later when we had dinner, I had the biggest smile. And the reason why is when I was approached with, it's a guy called TJ McKnight, who's been with Fossil Group for 20 years. He was tasked a few years ago to bring Zodiac back. And the reason how this all started was I had bought a Zodiac from Topper Jewelers. He did a Pepsi bezel, GMT, really cool colouring, and I'd never bought a watch. I'd never bought a watch at retail. Obviously, you get a little friendly favour discount from some of your friends in the industry, but I'd never really bought one. I'd always bought the brands that I'd worked with. And I was like, but this is my opportunity to diversify collections. And so, I got myself a Speedy. I got myself, obviously, a Tudor, which ended up selling, obviously. And then I would look at some of the cooler independents. But this Zodiac came up. Just to let you know, before that, I was starting getting heavily into some of the very cool independents, such as Halios in Canada or Vertex in the UK, or talking to people like Jars at Schofield. And I was like, this industry is so cool. It's all personality driven. And these juices started to flow with helping smaller brands, very small brands, with certain conversations. And I was like, consultancy, is this the way? Can the Pearson name be part of this consultancy distribution agency? And I was like, I don't know, these young kids. And anyway, I bought this watch. And TJ reached out via social media, goes, hey, I heard you're in Dallas. Can we talk about Zodiac? And I'm like, well, I actually just after COVID moved to England. And I wanted to stay there with my family. Couldn't happen. I don't know. You and I might be a bit more chameleon-like than we would give ourselves credit for, but not everybody can move from country to country or different environments and feel comfortable. My wife loves England, but it wasn't a place for us to stay as a family. We all had to be really happy. But this conversation with TJ was quite funky because the first chat was me saying no, but I do love the watch. And then my curiosity got the better of me. And I'm like, well, what do you need help with? And it was just back to basics. They had this 140-year-old brand that had lived for moments in the last few years. They had done certain watches with people like Hodinkee or Worn & Wound, and they do these limited editions that sell out in seconds. Or they'd now started to do some of the watches with people like Toppers, and that's how I got that watch. And they would make, a couple $100,000. That's a really good watch. Little project for an independent store with a small brand. But what I saw within that was when my questions started to get going again, after a few years, you dust off the cobwebs and it's like, well, what does the display look like? What does the customer service look like? Well, how do you tail end a customer service by making sure they come back? What does the collection look like? What are the key core models? What are the anchors that you hold your hat on? Actually, that 140 years of history, I've looked at the website. It doesn't look like you're telling this, that, and the other story that really I would want as a communicator. So it was very much, they had all of the pieces. It was just, we needed to put them together. So he said, well, let's talk every week. I'll send you a watch or so. I wasn't in the position to have my own company to get paid, but I was like, yeah, I'll take a watch. But that 1 hour turned to 3, and then, once a week turned to almost every night. And he said, would you move back to America for us over here and with Zodiac? And I talked to my wife, and she, jumped at the chance. Again, not because she didn't love England. It was just the fact that it was the time. I mean, after COVID, the whole world was very divided. After COVID, people were withdrawn, and we have a level of mental capability to look after each other. But my only job is to look after them, as I've alluded to in the past. And so my sadness of leaving England was coupled with the fact I knew that my kids and my wife would be happier. And that in the end of the day, I could move to Timbuktu or top of the moon. And as long as they're happy, I'd do it. But what I've found, going back to the point about my chat with Watch Pro, is that I am so fulfilled here. I feel like all of the experiences that were great for a decade or more with Ernst Benz and Bremont, to finding yourself when you have children and making changes that couldn't quite work because you wanted to be a dad. Right now, I am Mike Pearson again, the watch guy. And I think I've finally found that that's me. But what I also know is that if you have completely on the reverse of what Bremont is or was, like you had a brand new startup with momentum and 2 really captivating characters. Zodiac has 140 years of history, and after the quartz crisis and the Calam family sold after a century, or they sold it to a company that didn't know what it had, then they sold it to a company that didn't know how to look after it. And even Fossil Group, when they first bought it, didn't know how to make it look like the brand that this name deserved it to be, till a few years ago, when they started to invest in Switzerland, invest in a movement house, and they'd have designs that would deserve it and befitting of that once great name. And now that these bare bones are in place, what can I offer? A collection, 6 stories that are true anchors to the brand name, from diving watches to dress watches to complications. And then the innovation of the materials. We added, ceramics, titanium, meteorite. Then you look at what they've done the last few years with color. So you turn the palette up on some models and you turn it down on others to bring in the collections. And suddenly, with the movement conversations, which I can talk to you about what we're going to do this year, you have the ability to have this very large behemoth around us, which is Fossil, look at us as potentially the best of them. And so even though we might be 2% of a $2 billion company, what if that 2% can grow a little bit and influence all their brands to become something where Fossil might be your first watch, but then you kind of go in your directions of Seiko's all the way up to Rolexes and complications. But what if those brands, the ones they own and license, what if they start to take the good habits that we could bring at Zodiac within it, be it design elements, be it where it's made, how it's marketed, not just about here's a color, then it's gone, it's seasonal. What if there's a mainstay? And at the end of the day, why can't Fossil be part of the conversation? Because I really, really am, more than anything, I'm very proud of what Fossil have invested in with Zodiac. But more than anything, I'm so proud that they're listening. And I think for years and years, maybe full circle, I just wanted to be part of something that I could mold, I could be listened to, and we could put things into place that could work. And that's where I'm sitting today, and that's why I'm so happy.
You know, there's some great advice from Jean-Claude Biver that I actually followed recently myself, and I advise anyone who wants to do anything remarkable in the watch industry to heed this advice as well, and that is, whenever you're deciding what job to do next, try and get as close to the decision makers as you possibly can, so that your decisions, your input, your blood, sweat and tears and your ingenuity or otherwise has a direct effect on the success or the failure of a brand. You know, when I left Fratello in September, I had a few options of where to go, and I could have gone into some very established positions at a decent level, working for very big companies, similar to the examples that you mentioned earlier with like Swatch Group kind of brands or LVMH kind of brands, that kind of thing. But I didn't want to just take a paycheck and be a manager or be a head of some department that I just needed to maintain rather than grow. I wanted to get creative. I wanted to challenge myself. And so I looked around the different brands that I could have worked with, and I thought, well, where can I get as close as possible to the top so that the decisions that I make will be directly felt? And so that's why I started working with Arcanaut in Denmark, because I was like, okay, I can just sit down with the guy that designed this watch and started this brand, and we can steer it together for the next phase of its existence. And that is something I'd never done before. I've been lucky enough to try a few different roles in the industry, but that one is, you know, that's the only thing that was left to me apart from starting my own brand as far as I saw it. And now I think listening to you talk about how you're back in that role where like you're being listened to, the wealth of your experience is counting towards something tangible is wonderful. And I do want to talk about the collection and the models within the collection now very, very specifically. But before we get onto that, I want to take a slightly personal detour and talk about your experiences leaving home. So leaving England. Both you and I have emigrated. You live in the States again. I live in Germany. You've mentioned on a couple of occasions in this podcast and also when we were talking before we came on air that you miss home. Now, I miss home as well. When I go back, I have a certain set of feelings that I won't relay here because I want to hear your feelings first, unfiltered and uninfluenced by mine. But can you tell me what it's been like for you to leave England, to set up your life in America, to find, as you said, your greatest satisfaction there, and to have many of your dreams come true with your wife and your children and your business successes, and then go back and look at England? What do you feel? Do you really want to live there again, or has it changed for you somehow?
Well, we went, and I think my wife, if she was sitting in here today, she knows what I'd be doing, because when we couldn't stay, when it was very apparent that all of us had to be happy, I just had to realize for the first time that it was a pipe dream to go home. I always went home 2-3 times a year. You know, I'd go see my football team, I'd see my family, I'd eat the food I want. But when I was there for a year, you see that little crazy island, you know, that's full of everybody and everything, and which can be a little bit misunderstood by the outside world with stereotypes with beer and football, or, you know, the royal family and the green hills and the rain. I really within that year knew who I was. I really very much felt very proud of it. And, you know, I love things like our quirkiness. I like the differences of humour from Scotland to the north of England and all the way through the middle of the country. I've got Irish bloodline, so I like seeing my grandma and granddad still up there in Donegal. And, you know, you find within a very, very small place that humour, food, music, probably there more than anywhere else really matters. But it will always be within me, and I've come to peace with not being there now, and it's only been very recently. But when I first left in 2006, properly to move away, it wasn't like I went away when I was younger going to the cruise ships or living in Spain, because when you go away when you're that young, you would then gravitate towards things you know, and music you bring along that becomes your soundtrack of your life. For me, it was Oasis, and that those songs still get played today, even though I'm in my 40s. But when you then go to America and live, you find those pockets of safety. You'll find a bar that could be familiar, or you'll find an activity that makes you better. In Michigan, it was me riding my bikes around lakes. But then you also have to, I think this is probably where this conversation would go with your mindset, is you have to assimilate. So I would find baseball, and I never thought I'd like it, but I love it. And in fact, many of the stores that I opened for Bremont were based off of me going to see a Detroit Tigers game away from Michigan. And every time I went to a stadium in New York or California or Ohio, I would find a store nearby at the same time that the Tigers were playing, because there's 10 years or so on the road on your own. You cannot do it alone. You cannot find yourself isolated from society. But being an expat, you find expats. If being on the road, you find a community that, be it within the industry, but mostly for me, I preferred out of it just because I didn't want to be part of any politics. We can all just talk about who we know, where we want to go, and that can be a spiral. But for me, it was, believe it or not, Aston Villa and my soccer team, which are crap, really crap, but I love them. They became they became a huge part of where I'd went. So I find a bar on any given city or town that would be playing the Premier League in the morning, and I would find a group of friends. And so every single city and state, I would find that for the mornings, the work in the day, and then the evening time, I would find the best music or food or area to sit and be part of. And I would talk to people there, and it would be great. And I still got friends today from there. Or I would also find a thing within each state or city that you have to do or see. So when it was North Carolina, I went to Kitty Hawk to see where the Wright Flyer first flew. Or when I go to Arizona, I hike Camelback Mountain, which is getting harder as I get older. But I do love this country. I'm very proud that I live in America. But more than ever, I do know that I only work here, or work as well as I do here, because I've come to peace with who I am. Now, I'm not trying to pretend to be something I'm not, which I never have. But I also, you sometimes try a bit too hard to be that expat. For me, just Mike, and the best line I ever heard from anybody in this country was actually my wife when we just first started dating. Because everybody you talk to, it's like the accent, or it's, you say things differently and they think it's quite quirky, or do you know the Queen? Or did you? My wife said nothing. Like my girlfriend at the time, I was like, she just didn't care. And all I said was, well, not to sound weird, but you've not brought up that I've got an accent. What do you think of it? And she went, I don't care how you sound as long as you say the right things. And that was me, hook, line and sinker, done. And so from that minute on, I knew I was with somebody right, but also I think she understood what I needed to understand about myself, that if I'm true to myself...
Yeah, that you weren't just a novelty, that there was a place for you to be you there and be home. Because it's interesting. That's a very nice way. She put it very nicely and said a lot more in those words, and I think is immediately apparent maybe to people that haven't left home in the way that we have. Because, I mean, out here in Saxony, where I live, I am pretty much not the only one. There's about 1.1% of the population that's British or Irish, but one of the very few people out here that is from our culture, and there isn't the same kind of expat community. And whenever I meet people, it's very hard for me to learn how to speak German, probably because everybody wants to practice their English, and I'm one of the few native speakers that they run into in this part of the world particularly. And so I often ask myself, like, where is home for me? I am very chameleonic, as you alluded to before, as you are as well. To our credit, I think it's enabled us to do the jobs that we have done and spend great periods of time, like, if not actually alone, we often are in company, but not with people that we know well or with our families or good friends. But I do sort of find myself thinking, is there like a sort of moment where I feel like this is my only home? Because I went through a phase when I left England of feeling like quite homesick towards the end of the pandemic. I'll admit, like, towards the end of the pandemic, it got me. I was okay for about 9-10 months. I've not seen anybody I knew back home, and having just moved to a new country and not really been able to assimilate into that culture, I was okay with that because I quite like my own company, and I was with my girlfriend, so I wasn't completely alone. But I was like, I'm a bit homesick. I want to go back, like, I don't want to leave Germany, but I definitely need to see the green grass at home. And then I went back home and I didn't feel like that was home anymore either. And I had this horrible phase, maybe about a year, where neither place felt like home. Whereas now, it's kind of got to the point where both places feel like home. And I get annoyed when I have to leave Germany to go back to England. And as soon as I'm there, I'm annoyed that I can't stay for longer. And I'm hoping that I'm just part of some, like, massive arc that I think you've probably already been through. And like you sound much more at peace with yourself than I am with myself yet. But it's nice for me to listen to it. It gives me hope, because I feel like Germany, Dresden, Saxony is my home, but I haven't quite shaken all those things I love about the north of England, the terrible rain, the questionable food, the wonderful football teams, I said, let's not get into that. No, but it's great to hear. And I think like for any of our listeners, and the reason why I bring this up is because I really want to shine a light on how different like the lifestyles within the watch industry can be. Our lives, especially like the traveling that we've done and still do, look pretty glamorous from the outside looking in. And I'm not trying to put people off it saying, oh, there's drawbacks. Oh, it's not as good as it looks. Because it is as good as it looks, but it's also as hard as you might imagine it to be on occasion. So let's talk about now I've touched on that rather sort of like somber moment. Let's talk about the collection.
Can I just finish on that bit? I do think that you're right. I've said it before on another podcast. Can't remember which one, but I tried to explain to somebody about that you live for moments. Like we could be on a conversation with a store or with a PR agency or a media partner or an event. And that event or that meeting could last an hour. It could be 2 minutes. And the manager just goes, I haven't got time for you today. And you've gone from Detroit to Arizona to LA, drove 3 hours in horrible traffic just to be told no. And but you never know. And reverse that all of those travels for those 2 minutes, they go, actually, it was pretty cool. Come back and we'll sign the deal. But the bits that no one has to care about in this watch industry is the hard work that goes behind it. Not just for someone like me or you, but it's also the teams around us that help plan travel, how make sure stock gets there, make sure things look nice. I mean, there's so many things that are so mundane. But at the end of the day, the only thing that does matter are the watch is good. Is it in the right place? Does it represent the brand well? And at the end of the day, all of that stuff is the customer going to buy it, and is he or her happy with it on their wrist? And if we all have that mindset that the only person that matters is that person that chooses us over 700 watch brands, it's worth it.
Let's talk about the watches in the current collection for Zodiac and why people should choose them over 700 other brands.
With Zodiac itself, we know that this year, with 70 years of the brands like Blancpain celebrating the 50 Fathoms, Zodiac had one of them in its own right. It had the Seawolf in 1953, first commercially available dive watch. And that Seawolf name spurred that brand for 20, 30 years. And to a point where just before the quartz era happened, there was 250,000 Zodiacs being made for a global audience. And it was a huge brand. What I found with this current collection, what I found with what I'm doing now, is that those stories, 70 years before the Seawolf, there were so many different variations of Zodiac. What I alluded to with how it's built, where it's built, the movement that's been put together with STP, and how we've now got this brand position with a core collection. It's making sure people not skip over the 30, 40 years of not being the great brand that it deserves to be. We've got to find a place where we can find a happy medium. So the entire collection, bar one model, is less than $2,000. There's no quartz anymore in any of the Zodiac collection, and we start at under $1,000. So we've got a very unique opportunity because of who we're owned by. We have all of the different design, material expertise that we could ever be at 42. And we've also got our own facility in Switzerland. So the collection is, for some people on the outside, might look at it three different ways. Number one, what it used to be. Then the second one is what they have seen, good or bad. And then there's the third side of people discovering a mix of everything that was, because the collection is very much nodding to its past. Also embracing the fact that some of the color palettes and the differences in styles we've carried on, we've refined, but there are 6 basic stories, and most of them are nodding probably correctly to the dive era. But we've got car rally styles, we've got aviation styles which have come and gone. We've had mystery dials that celebrate the astrographic from the 60s, but they get sunset because they did small amounts and they were hard to build. So the collection right now is tight. Maybe there's a lot of colors and there's a lot of models that will come, but it's tight, in my opinion, of where we can then educate the outside consumer with 6 major platforms. And if you were looking on the website now, you might count 5, but there is a chronograph that's going to come this April, which is really exciting. I won't tell you too much, but the brand needs a complication within it, more than just GMT and world timer. But now we've got a chronograph that will come. So that will finish off for me the 6 pillars of what will grow and drive Zodiac. the balance between, now we've got those anchors, the balance between finding the right retailers, but also living in a post-COVID world and embracing the fact that we were growing really wonderfully with Hodinkee, Warren & Wear and some of our online partners. In the UK, we had CW Sellers, Jura. But now it's for me, and this is 100% my push on this, is I truly believe that those 12 inches of glass on a showcase are where magic happens. And we need proper storytellers who understand that there's going to be some people that are disillusioned because, the brand has tried to come and go a few times, but it wasn't right. The quality, the story, the aesthetics, there were some moments that were good, but as a whole, the consistency wasn't there. So these storytellers, these retailers are ready to rock and roll. But what I will say, what we're doing this year, by the end of 2023, we will have every single model with an STP movement. We are improving the internal materials, which again, I won't give away too much just yet because it's a big thing for us to do this year. But we're not changing the game. We're not saying that this is a genre. We're not, this is not qualities that will change our price point or where we have our standing. But I do think that what Zodiac customers deserve, or people who are looking at what Zodiac could be for them, is reliability, strength, forward-looking. Being able to take away the complexity of having to work with other movement suppliers such as Efta, Salita or Soprod. They are all brilliant. They're just really hard to find movements for as we want to grow appropriately. But by having STP and refining it, we get a chance, a very, very big chance to go way back to what the Calam family wanted, was great watches, good designs, interesting materials, their own complications at an affordable price. So with last year being 140th year of Zodiac, we did not come out with the gold watch with a tourbillon to say, hey, this is our anniversary. We got the collection right, and we had mini flexes with limited editions alongside the core by having titanium, ceramic, meteorite, and we finished the year with a really wonderful partnership with Panam and then another dive watch, which was a left-hand drive, which was designed with one of our ambassadors, Andy Mann, to be a proper dive tool watch. And so we finished with a really big bag, and then we went straight into January with commercial success, with rowing blazers. But what we did with that watch was, I wouldn't say we alienated, we couldn't really sell it to our retailers. But the retailers we have, and the ones that we want to work with, went, okay, here we go. We're not waiting till summer for watches now. Zodiac's going to start, and we've got a plan where every second month, every third month, we will release something that could be, in rowing blazers case, something commercial, or the next watch will be quite divisive because of the color palettes we've chosen. And then we can bring in something which is celebrated because we're going back to some of that past. And then for the summer, we do what we've done really well, which is add core colorways. But these are ones that are really, in my opinion, missing from the collection. Whereas if you walk into a local store and you see the collection, you will go, wow, there's so much variety of personality there. I think I could find a watch for me. But also at the same time, because the price points are not unapproachable, but they're definitely, there's a good chunk of change for most normal guys and girls, $1,000 to $2,000. But we still come in at a level where a lot of the Swiss industry now is either going to be Seiko, and then there's a big gap to the mainstream brands. And if you are not wanting to buy into the groups, which some people don't, you might want to look for something different. And that's probably where Zodiac has that niche, independent feel. But obviously we've got a large ownership. But it definitely is a startup because we are treated very, very, very much on our own compared to what the main brands with the ownership group are. But the collection is sound. I just think more than anything, when I've done podcasts like yours or other podcasts that I did way too many of last year in a row. But the reason why I did it was just to kind of do what I've always done, as in, hi, this is our story. If you trust it, come to me. You'll be on a journey. But I think with this brand, more than Erd's Benz, and definitely more than what Bremont was, I think we have to kind of push it up more than pull it up, because we have to really, really make sure people are on the journey with us, because it's a name that matters. A famous story which kind of came from my last year was I reached out to the Vintage Zodiac Forum, and they had not spoken to us for 20 years, apparently. And I found out that when Fossil first bought the brand, the Vintage Collector hated it, probably rightly so for some reasons, because it was not built to the same level of what they were buying, and they just didn't want to speak to us. So all it was an olive branch of, can I show you? And what we found by just having a handout, and it is amazing, and I never thought of it, that there are people that take massive ownership of that because their dads or their granddads wore it. passed it on. And they feel like it's a part of them, and they should. And I really, truly think that we should take ownership within this brand. And we then have to have a custodianship. We have to feel like we are, name bearers of this brand, and we are just tenderly bringing it back out to the light, because for too long it was just a name on a dial and it wasn't for Zodiac. And so, long story short, which is a very long story, trying to be short, was that we've got this collection that befits the name.
Well, there you go. Couldn't have said it any better, Mike. Definitely couldn't have used any fewer words, but that's brilliant. No, really, and it's a great place to end the conversation today, because we've made it to at least an hour, I think, of good quality content, some personal stuff in there as well, which is always very much appreciated on a real-time show, because we do like to keep it real. If you enjoyed that interview, dear listeners, then please get in touch with us. You can contact me via Instagram at RobNuds, that's ROBNUDDS. You can contact my regular co-host there as well, that's Alon Ben Joseph, ALONBENJOSEPH, or you can contact us via email. I'm rob@therealtime.show, and Alon is alon@therealtime.show. I am sure we will get Mike back on in the future again. You're up for that, right, Mike?
Always. Look at chat.
Always. Good man. Good man. All right. We'll be back next week with another Q&A session and another interview with one of watchmaking's finest. Until then, stay safe and keep on ticking.